first I want to thank Bart Stevens
Yes, he was
that we had
wonderful.
last week with our series on the difference between men's grief and women's grief and understanding grief. And Chad has been extremely gracious to come on and talk about the death of his son with us tonight. We have an interesting story, you and I, Chad, that I, want to share with everybody because his son found a way to connect with me before I ever met Chad and his lovely wife Kim, who is here in the studio with us tonight. I was giving a seminar. There was about, oh, I don't know, maybe 40 people in this seminar. And their son, who was 13 when he passed away, came to me. And I said to the audience, who's got the young teenager that passed away? Nobody said anything. And I said, I think he took his life. He's showing me that he took his life. And nobody said anything. And I said, he's standing here. He plays the drums. He's showing me drumsticks. Nobody said anything. So I pointed to a lady and I said to her, it's for you. And she said, no, it's not mine. My son was in his late 20s when he killed himself, and it's not for me. And we kind of left it at that because obviously no one knew what I was talking about. Well, the woman that had the young man in his 20s was a woman that helped other people or guided other people with suicide loss. And that following week, the Villaborghis actually called her because they had heard about her. And I guess she said to you, I want to tell you about what happened at the seminar.
She had her and my wife. Well, we actually met her at a bookstore, and it was probably about a half hour into the conversation was when we were describing him and what we were kind of telling her our story. The light bulb went on. She said, "Oh my gosh!" She goes, "I have something to tell you." And then she told us about the seminar that she was at with you.
And so the reason I mention that is I just want everybody to understand that spirit finds a way when they want to tell you that they're safe, that they're sorry, because certainly their son was impulsive in his what he did, and he has always told us how sorry he has been from the minute that we were able to connect. Chad, would you mind sharing with our audience what happened with Kieran and so they understand what you had gone through with that?
Sure. It was December 27th in 2008, so it was 2 days after Christmas. He was, I don't know if 13-year-olds can see other people, but he was dating or seeing or whatever it is they do, dating another. She was about a year older than him, girl in the neighborhood who was actually a friend of my daughter's first. And then my daughter and her kind of went separate ways, and then he started hanging out with her. And this was probably October, and she wasn't somebody that we wanted him hanging out with. She was just kind of a negative influence on him. And we had actually talked to him about it, and he got upset, and we decided to go and talk to her parents about it. And we sat down and talked to her parents, and they actually agreed with us. They agreed that they were too young to, be dating or whatever it was they were doing, and so we kind of held them back and split. And a few weeks later, we kind of found out that he was still kind of going behind our back talking to her and things like that. And my wife and I kind of discussed it, and we thought, well, maybe this is one of those things that if we just leave it alone, maybe it'll just fizzle out. So we decided to just leave it alone. We weren't going to say anything to him, just kind of let it run its course, because we figured it'd be done in another month or two. And you have to understand, and I think you know Kieran, you know his spirit and his personality. He was truly he was just a kid that brought a smile to everybody's face.
He is a light.
When he would walk into the room, I mean, everybody loved him. Everybody did that, and I know it sounds kind of, I think I'm saying it because it's my own kid. I'm not just saying that. I mean, he truly lit up a room when he came in, and over the next couple months, we just noticed a big change in his personality. That he was getting more defiant. He was talking back, different things like that. And so Christmas came, and we basically I told him that, you know what, I'm done with it. I don't want you seeing her anymore. I don't care if it fizzles out or not. I'm done. You're not to do it anymore. And on the 27th of December, my daughter's birthday is the 16th of January. So we had decided to go. I wanted to go get her. She always wanted a futon for her birthday, so I was going to go out that day and get her a futon for her birthday. One of the rules that we had with the kids at the time was we would leave them at home alone, but they were not allowed to open the door for anybody or answer the phone or anything like that, let alone go outside. Mm-hmm. So I had went to Walmart to go get this futon, and he was at home alone. When I came home, he was out on the sidewalk on the side of the house with her and another friend of theirs. Mm-hmm. So I came in, and he came walking in. He knew he was busted, and he didn't say much. And I just looked at him and I said, "Put your phone on the table. You're done." So he went up to his room, and I was kind of debating on how to handle it. I was mad, but I didn't want to lose my temper, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. So my wife was out, and I called her, and I think she was on her way home from work, and she had called me saying she was on her way home, and I said, "Well, your son," I came, told her the story, that he was outside, and she said, "He was outside?" And I said, "Yeah, he was outside. Nobody was home. He broke the rules. I took his phone." So she came home, and we didn't really discuss it. We didn't really go into much detail about it. He kind of spent the rest of the night up in his room. And about 9:20, 9:30, we were sitting there watching TV, and my wife had said, "We need to address this." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. We're calm now. Let's address it." So we called him downstairs. He came downstairs, and he sat on the table there, and we said, "I don't know what's going on with you. You're acting funny." He said, "No, I'm not." It's basically, and coming from him, I mean, it was I kind of remember it now, kind of taken back by it. But I mean, he's, his 13-year-old kid's looking at it and saying, "No, it's not me, it's you. Mm-hmm. You guys are overreacting. I like her. If you do this to me, she's not gonna like me anymore." And and Kieran, if you knew Kieran, he was one of those kids that he wanted to please everybody. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to disappoint anybody. So we talked for about 5 minutes, and we weren't getting anywhere. And I finally just had it, and I said, "You're grounded. You're grounded. I don't know when I'm going to give you your phone back. We'll deal with it then." So he went upstairs. He had a couple of words with his sister, which is nothing new. And probably about 10 minutes later, I heard a loud pop. And I had disassembled my daughter's bed to put the futon in her room, and I had put her bed in pieces up against our bed, so it was laying up against the bed. And we'd been in that house for 7 years, and I'd never heard that noise before. And I thought, they're up there screwing around, and the bed came down. Mm-hmm. So I hollered up and I asked, what was that noise? And there was nothing. No, there was complete silence, which was nothing new if they were in trouble. Mm-hmm. Usually you hear snickering, So I hollered up again and I asked what the noise was, and there was still nothing. It was just an eerie silence. So I got up, started going upstairs, and my wife got up and started walking behind me. And we got upstairs to our landing. We had a little small loft landing there, and his bedroom was off to my left, and I saw his light on his bedroom. My daughter's room was next in front of us, and she was standing there, and she had a really weird look on her face, and then our bedroom was to hers. And I came up and I said, "What was that noise?" And she goes, "I don't know." And she kind of looked over she kind of did that, looked over in our bedroom. Well, I started walking towards his room, because his light was on, but then I glanced over in my room and I noticed a light on, and I didn't know, it's kind of an odd light. And then it dawned on me that that light was my closet light. And as I'm turning to go into my room, I'm about 2 or 3 steps from going into my room, and as I realized that was my closet light, it dawned on me what that was. So what I'm going to tell you, it's going to take me 2 minutes to tell you this, but I mean, it took 3 seconds to do this,
Sure,
but I mean, it
right.
seemed like it was 10 years.
Of course.
So I knew what I was going to see. I just didn't know how I was going to see it. So when I turned the corner, he was laying on the ground, and I just kind of focused in on him, and I noticed that he had a lot of blood in it coming from his head. And it was at that moment where I always kind of thought that outer body experience was, kind of thought it was TV,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a weird feeling because that's what I had, because I felt like I was standing outside my body watching myself and my daughter and my wife panic and scream and shout.
You need to disassociate as soon as possible.
I think that's what I did, and so I started hollering at them to call 911, and I picked him up because I wanted to take him downstairs. I wanted him to be as close to the front door as possible, so when the fire department got there. And with all my training that I've had with my past jobs that I've had, I knew that he was probably gone, but I still carried him downstairs and did CPR downstairs on him. My wife, I had told her to go outside and wave down the police department, and at the time I worked for Chandler Police, and we lived in Chandler, and so everybody that got the call that night, they knew where they were going. They knew whose house they were going to.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it wasn't just a tragedy for us. I mean, it was a tragedy to everybody that showed up that night, because they all knew who I was, and they worked with those people. And
You had been a police officer for how long?
about 10 years. And so when they showed up, the first person that showed up, he basically told me to get outside, and so I went outside, and it was the weirdest thing. It was one of the coldest nights I remember in Phoenix. It was probably 28, 29 degrees, and I remember feeling the cold, but I wasn't cold.
Mm-hmm.
Just it kind of bit you, and then
Such a state of shock.
Mm-hmm.
it was, and that's kind of how I stayed that way for probably about 6 months. I remember I didn't cry a whole lot. I didn't, just kind of a weird funk.
You talk about what your wife was there also. What happened whenever she saw your son, and then
She didn't. I made sure that she didn't see him, and I made sure that my daughter didn't see him. I already knew what I had seen, and it's something that I'm used to seeing, but you're not used to seeing it with your own relatives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had seen what I had gone through. I had seen, 1,000 times, if not more.
Sure.
But when it's somebody it's a little bit different. So I took on that burden of protection, and basically dealing with. At the time, I didn't really know what I was going to be dealing with for the next 6 years, but I took that on so they wouldn't have to. And my daughter, I didn't know she was down. She was still upstairs at the time. They had to go up and get her, and they actually surrounded my son, and they protected her from that too.
Mm-hmm.
So when they announced that your son had passed, and you're telling your wife that he's gone, what was her first reaction, and what was your reaction to her?
Well, they didn't tell us that he had passed. I already knew that he was gone. I remember telling the one officer, I don't remember who I told, but it was one of my friends that had come up, and I remember I when he'd come up to me, I'd said, when the ambulance gets here, I said, just transport him. I just want him out of the house. I just, and they didn't do that. I remember they were walking back out with the gurney, and my wife saw it. That's how she found out. And I remember we talk about it all the time, and it's kind of funny what you remember, because I remember bits and pieces of it like it was yesterday, and she remembers bits and pieces like it was yesterday. But we'll bring up things that we each remember, but yet I don't remember what she's telling me, and she doesn't remember what I'm telling her.
That's very normal.
Yeah.
And the fact that you bring it up all the time, I think, is very important for people to hear, that you have the ability to talk to each other about it, to continue to talk. I know that both of you talk to him on the other side. I know that he's very, good at giving signs and letting you know that he's around. I know that he's been so awesome at, his light, as you said, because I've only met Kieran since he's been over, but he's such a light and has such a sweet essence. And it was an impulsive thing. It was something he did out of impulsivity. And when looking back on that impulsivity, you being a police officer, your wife being a teacher, and seeing some of his behavior, you didn't expect. It's important for people to understand, because everybody talks about suicide, looking for the signs and understanding. And there's certainly, I've had people who suffer from depression on here and other suicide survivors, and they say that they've missed the signs. There were not signs for you that you missed. This situation was that this child was impulsively angry and didn't have a grasp on the finality of what he was doing. It was done out of him being angry at the time.
Right.
What is the difference between how you handle that knowledge, and since this is about male grief, as you just said to us that you either went numb or compartmentalized for 6 months, or you went into this mode of your training in order to get through it. What was the difference between the way you grieved and the girls in your family grieved?
I'm trying to remember at the time, at that first year, I kind of remember my wife wanting to talk about it. She kept wanting to analyze it. She kept wanting to find answers. And for me, knowing the finality of it, knowing that we would never find an answer to it, it frustrated me. I would start getting to the point where I wouldn't start yelling at her, but I would start getting kind of a little angry, like, you need to let it go, just quit looking, stop looking, you're not gonna find it, because she spent the next 6 months going through his room and his books and his papers and his phone and his looking for any little thing she could find, and I, for some reason, I had enough sense at that time, I guess, to know, I guess to be comfortable with the fact that I knew what's done is done. It doesn't matter what we're gonna do. We can't get him back. I mean, at this point, it doesn't matter why he did it. So I mean, for us to, we grieved a lot. We still grieve differently.
Of course.
We still, there's things that she will still do that kind of irritate me in the way she grieves, and there's things that I do the way I grieve that irritate her. But we've gotten through it with, to be honest with you, it's taken 6 years to do this, but I mean, we've gotten through it with humor.
No,
You know,
we get that big time.
Yes,
we
one of the best ways.
we joke about it. We talk about it. You have to, or you're going to go crazy.
By the way, if you're interested or have had any suicide in your family, give us a call at 602-875-0444. And if you have any questions for us, we're glad to take the calls. Chad, I wanted to say, you said you didn't cry. How long before you did?
I cried a little bit that night, but not like I thought I would. Well, you got to kind of know my background a little bit. I kind of came from a family who didn't. My dad didn't show emotions, but my mom overly showed emotions, and I tended to flock to the side of not showing emotions because my mom was so overly emotional. So I tended to kind of, you know what, I'm not gonna do that. So I would cry. I would cry alone. I would cry when I was, when I knew I wouldn't be disturbed, or I cried. I kind of just, I took that burden upon myself because at the time, my wife was so grief-stricken that I felt like I didn't want to add to it. So I took my grief on myself and I dealt with it myself instead of what I should have done is tried to, rely on her, because then what that does over the next few years is, she feels like she's alone in the grief, and then it just creates,
It's a separation that happens to people who've had that kind of loss, because men and women grieve differently, and because they don't get in sync with the grief, often it splits couples apart. And that's, you just described why. Because
they don't know how to talk to each other, and then there ends up being kind of a resentment, as you said, because she's wanting to find answers because that's what her needs are, and they don't match your needs because you have this sense of that the finality in this, you can't change anything, and so it's a total different mindset.
And it's left brain, right brain. Left brain, right brain, feminine, masculine. That's absolutely what we're trying to teach here. I want to go back to you talking about humor, because it's so important. It's beyond important, because the more you can express yourself through humor, the lighter your vibration. The lighter your vibration, the more you can connect to the other side. So when people are having that kind of humor and putting things into a perspective with your humor, it allows your connection with your son to be greater. You guys moved to Georgia shortly after your son's passing. You left the police department. Your wife is a teacher. In fact, she teaches junior high kids the exact age of your son. And you moved to Georgia shortly after. And we have kept in touch over the years because of the connection that Kieran made for all of us. And I remember maybe it was the first or second year that you were in Georgia having a conversation with your wife. And what was she telling me? She might have to pipe in. We might have to hear her voice over here. She was laughing about something at Christmas time with his ashes or the urn and a fireplace.
Oh, we were.
And it was some sign that he had given. Am I getting that right? Do I remember that correctly? What am I getting there?
We were always a tight knit family. Well, we still are. We were always a tight knit family with humor. We always had a kind of a more of a morbid, off the wall type sense of humor.
Adam's family type.
An offensive type sense of humor to a lot of people, probably. And so my daughter, who fashions after me, I think it was the second or third year, we were, we're not the type, we don't give out Christmas cards and photos and all that, but some of our friends do. Well, we had started receiving, postcard, the Christmas card with the family on it. And my daughter said, why don't we go get his urn and we'll sit in front of the fireplace and we'll put a hat on it and we'll do a family photo of it. I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
It's funny.
It's funny.
It is funny.
It is funny.
It is
You're
funny,
right.
you know,
it's funny.
And you know, it's either that or we just get depressed at Christmas,
Right,
which
right.
I mean we do anyway.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean we now joke, and we only have a tight group of friends that we can do that with because they were the ones that were there that night when it happened. So, you know, we'll make jokes when we're out in public, or you know, something will happen where somebody will kind of find out, you know, our story, and one of us will make a crude joke about it, you know, and that it kind of brings the room to a standstill. We're laughing, but nobody, you know, why are you laughing about that? That's because we have to. Because we have
but
to.
he would laugh because
too, yeah.
you know, obviously he's talked to me several times and he is laughing too. Yeah. So tell everybody what you do for a living now, because I think your transition from helping people as a police officer to what you do now is a very interesting karma to dharma kind of thing. Like karma means the stuff that happens to you. Dharma means that the stuff that happens to you, you help other people with. So tell people what you do now. It's interesting.
I'm actually a funeral director. I'm manager at Queen of Heaven in Mesa, Queen of Heaven Catholic Funeral Home in Mesa. It's a hard job at times, but for the most part, it's very fulfilling. Because I do sit around a table with grieving families, and I can, at times, I do feel like I can kind of put my 2 cents in to help people where most normal people probably wouldn't step into that. But there are times where, you know, you have to read the family too. I mean, I'm not just going to say something, but most of the time, if I get a good feel on the family, I'll open up a little bit, or I'll kind of tell them the short version of my story, and a lot of times they're appreciative of it, and then most of the time they actually kind of ask me, why are you doing this? And I said, so I can be here to help you go through it too. You know, now keep in mind also that, you know, when we're talking about humor or what I do now, you know, it's been 8 years now. It's been almost 9 years. I mean, this wasn't the first year or two. You know, I mean, it takes years to develop. You know, you have to, you know, to have a sense of humor about it or to joke about it. So I mean, I don't want to offend people by thinking that, no, 3 months later we're telling jokes.
Right,
no, I'm talking 4, 5, 6 years later.
Right.
You know, where we can be comfortable enough to finally kind of, you know, try to make light of something that was horrible.
You moved to Georgia, what, shortly after the death?
It was about 6 or 7 months after, yeah.
That's really quite unusual. What made you move?
Well, against the advice of several friends and Melinda herself as well.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt whatsoever.
And I say things so sweetly, don't I?
You're doing what?
You're doing this wrong. My wife's brother lives in Georgia. You know, that's a good point about men and women grieving. That kind of brings me to that point. When I went and turned in my resignation to Chandler Police, Sherry Kyler, who was the chief at the time, who treated, I mean, it was incredible the way the department and the way she treated me. I went in and I personally handed her my resignation. And I sat down and she shut the door and she looked at me and she said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "Yeah, I'm a big boy. I know what I'm doing." And she looked at me and she said, "Are you sure you're not running away?" And I remember it pissed me off at the time. I know what she meant now. And I needed to hear that. But it made me mad at the time because I thought, well, because I'm confronted with the truth. And when you're confronted with the truth, you want to hide it, it makes you mad.
Right.
So no, I'm not running away. But I was. I thought if we could go somewhere else, start over, against the advice of everybody, you know, don't do anything for the first year. Wait until the first year. I mean, we did it in half that time. And so my wife's brother lives in Georgia, and he even kind of suggested, he says, "Why don't you guys come out, stay with us? You can start over." blah blah blah. And so
was your wife also open to moving?
In her state of mind, yes.
Okay.
She's normally, I'm usually pretty good about decisions like that. But the bigger decisions, she's a little bit better. So at the time, I think if she was in the right frame of mind, she would have said no. But I think even at that time, with the hurt and everything, I think that even for her, I think it was like, well, yeah, let's.
And it was a feeling of trying to make a family connection. As I recall, the way you guys had felt about it at the time, it was about feeling like you would have support of a family member.
Yes, and so we moved to Georgia, and it took a couple of years, but her brother just wasn't who we thought he was. He wasn't the support system that we needed, or he ended up. We lived literally a quarter of a mile from each other, and we ended up the last 2.5, 3 years of being there, we never even spoke.
Wow.
So we were kind of there, left on our own. Which, looking back on it now, I mean, it did actually help our family. It helped us to become closer, because we only had each other to rely on. We didn't have Melinda. We didn't have our friends. We didn't have anybody to.
And your daughter was how old at the time?
She was 15. She was 2 weeks shy of her 16th birthday.
So you're changing her school.
So we pulled her out of school. She went through a difficult time for about the first 3 or 4 years while we were there.
And she's a stoic. You said to everyone, she's like me. And so I'll say to everyone, she was very stoic about the whole situation.
She doesn't show her emotions.
Kim to emote when we all were together. We worked as a family a bit, and Kim would be emotive, but your daughter and you would hold that emotion back. And I remember saying to Kim, I just want to get her to cry. I just got to get her to cry, because she was holding that all in, and that's not healthy. So I think also, though, am I wrong that she was very supportive of the family moving, though? She didn't do one of these teenage things, no, I don't want to go, did she?
She didn't throw a fit, but she had a couple of things against her. I mean, she had her age, which at that time I don't know if she understood at that time what this really was. So I think her moving, kind of was like, yeah, sure. Well, yeah, let's see what happens.
And you all wanted to get out of the house.
Well, we wanted to get out of the house because it happened in the house. It felt, well, I mean, the whole house is a reminder, especially going up into our bedroom, seeing my closet, it's just, the whole thing was just a reminder.
And by the way, if your daughter is stoic like you, what she's going to do is try to protect the two of you. So she's not going to tell you.
Which she does.
100%.
Which she's like me.
100% does that.
And I know her. I know that she's like me. I know she'll cry on her own. I know she'll wait till she's alone. I know she won't put that burden on us. She wants to do it her way and do it alone.
And
but that's not always the best way.
She's what, 20?
She's 24.
She's 24. Oh my gosh, I can't believe how fast time goes.
I know.
And she was 15 when.
Yeah.
Kieran.
So she changed in her junior year. Okay, so she'd been with all of her friends all of her life. She's not going to say anything to you, by the way.
She didn't really. She wouldn't. We would get into arguments, and it would kind of come up a little bit. I gotta say, she did really good about when we would get into arguments. And I think we all three did really good about we never blamed each other for what happened, because we all took on our own responsibility. I felt bad because I left the gun out. My wife felt bad because she told him to go upstairs. My daughter felt bad because they were up there arguing. We all feel like it was our fault, but
it wasn't
anybody's nobody's fault, right?
But at the time, you don't know that. At the time, we're all blaming ourselves. We weren't blaming each other.
You need to have something to blame. We need to have.
Right.
something that says
like,
this happened because.
Yeah, so like Kim trying to find her answers. Right, it's like, what is the answer?
Yeah.
You know, do you think in retrospect, just a thought, that he had a little attention deficit disorder and impulsivity was a contributing factor to that? And that's question one. And question two, Duffy had mentioned earlier to me, and just before we got on the show to you, that do you think children who are involved in video games and that kind of thing don't have the same conceptualization of what might happen if they do something like that? Those two questions.
I don't know if he had a attention deficit, but he was definitely impulsive, and which kind of goes into your next question. Him and I, again, here I go blaming myself. Him and I used to like to play the computer games together, the shooting the shooting games, the war games, and then on top of it, we would also watch, movies with violence and because I had grown up as a small kid, my mom would let me watch movies that I probably shouldn't have been watching. But at the time, I also wanted to be a filmmaker when I was young. So I as a young age, I knew that wasn't real. I knew it was fake, and I always liked, the more gorier the better for me, because I always wanted to figure out how they did it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of put my childhood on him, thinking, well, I grew up like that. I turned out okay. So I mean, he can watch it. He can do that stuff too. And I think it numbs people to what violence really is, because being a police officer for 10 years, being a paramedic 10 years before that, I mean, I've spent 20 years in public service seeing what people can do to the human body, and what the human body can also endure. Some of Hollywood looks pretty real, but nothing substitutes for the real thing. So when you see,
a lot of times they are absolutely stunned.
Which is why they're stunned when they actually do see something real that happens. And I think with him, I truly believe that I think he thought that he was going to go up there, he was going to shoot himself, and he was going to be okay. And I think he was just going to be I'm going to show you a moment.
Yeah, I'm going to show you a moment.
I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. But he didn't think about the consequences.
Looking back at that evening, not trying to come up with any answers, but looking back at that evening when you're talking about getting angry about him for seeing a girl that you didn't approve of or whatever happened, would you do anything differently?
My wife, she has that guilt more than I do, because after talking with you, without getting too much into what we've talked about, about the other side, and about how we're, you're in your groups, and you know things beforehand.
Your contract, your spiritual contract.
Right. Knowing that, if I hadn't have left the gun out, according to what you have taught me and what you've told me, he would have passed some other way.
Yes.
So I guess being educated in that, it doesn't ease the pain, but I mean, I guess knowing that, I'm more comfortable in what would I have done differently. I disciplined my child the way I thought that he should have been disciplined. I'm not going to have a child that people don't enjoy being around. So I mean, just because a child does something doesn't mean that I'm not going to still discipline them. My wife, for the longest time, I think even a little bit today, I think she still plays that night in her head. Well, maybe I shouldn't have said this. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe we shouldn't have even called him down. Maybe we shouldn't have done that. But
But how many times have we as parents said to our kids, "Are you kidding me? I told you that this was not acceptable behavior. Get your butt up those stairs. Get your homework done. That phone is mine for the next 2 weeks." Who hasn't done that?
Right.
Who hasn't done that?
You know, I mean, I was disciplined, and my wife was disciplined, and I'm sure, you know, we all come from the age of beatings.
Spanked, sure.
You know, and we all turned out okay.
The age of beating.
You know, so you know,
is that around the Renaissance?
You know, but it's
meaning
true,
that spanking was acceptable.
It was acceptable.
Even when I was in high school, the principal spanked us with a paddle if we were bad. You got sent down to the principal's
our neighbors,
office.
My friend's mother would spank us if we acted up at their house. You know, and, but we're in a different society today. So, would I have done anything differently? Probably not. You know, I still would discipline. I still would, you know, because that's what teaches our children to be respectable people.
That's exactly right.
So.
That's exactly right. I don't think that you can second guess that night. I think you guys were being normal.
Well, and he had been disciplined harder than that in the past. You know, I just think that this was an unusual circumstance for him, and he didn't understand his own emotions, being you know, emotionally attached to a girl.
He was in a Romeo and Juliet moment, so to speak, is the way that it feels to me. And at 13, you're not old enough to understand that kind of a feeling. And
he's just going into all of the hormone rush.
Right. Right.
You know. So he wants to feel attractive. He wants to feel like he can talk to girls, all different types of things. And so. And when you talk about it's a different world today, it's a different world when it comes to, you know, males and females in their teens. It's frightening.
Yeah. So, and I do want to address that, what you said about the gun, okay? Because, you know, you obviously, being a police officer, you had a gun in the house. I mean, I have talked to people who have had children who have taken a bathrobe tie, put it around their neck, and put it on the low end of the shower and pass that way. So you're right, Chad. You can't second guess any of that. You can't do that to yourself or you know, to anybody. I think we have a question here.
We have a question from Jane. Just a minute.
Bill has to transfer.
Sorry.
First. Okay, Jim, we're going to transfer you. I want to thank Kim Villaborgi. She's in our studio tonight, and she's smiling and shaking her head, so we want to thank her too. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jane.
Good evening, everyone.
How are you, dear?
Oh, wonderful. And I just really wanted to call in with just such appreciation. I can't speak to any of this firsthand, but the show and the speaker and the circumstance, it's just phenomenal, and I know it's going to be helping so many people. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
But wow, this is just amazing.
Yeah,
Jane, thank you for bringing it up, and thank you for speaking about it and addressing it, and just thank you for that.
Yeah, Jane, do you have a question for any of us in regard to the difference in how men and women grieve?
I don't, but I really love the answer, and actually, it just speaks to, I just think the whole man-woman thing. Can't speak to that whole experience, but just the way you explained something, I'm like, wow, that sure just explains a lot of stuff for me.
That's good.
And just how the perception is. And I really like how you said you went back and, you know, your dad was so-and-so, and that's kind of how you took over, because I have to say, obviously, being female, I totally get how your wife and that.
Well, then he's talking about his karmic profile too. Everything that we teach, that we are part of our nature and our nurture, no matter what our circumstances are in life. And I think that one of the reasons that I am so fond of Kim and Chad Villaborgi is because they really have done their work around this process, and everything that we teach on this show in regards to life after life and understanding your karmic profile and how you make some kind of meaning out of it to grow spiritually and understand and honor and move forward in a direction that creates balance and harmony and continue the process of what your life path is here on the planet. And I think Chad is really talking about that very, very well. He brought in his own family background. Kim has some of her own family background that contributed to some of her, situation with all of this. And I think that whether it's hard to conceptualize or not, what Kieran did, and they will both agree with me, is taught them so much. And that, when you have this kind of loss, the partnership between the spirit of the other person on the other side and your spirit creates movement of energy that is nothing short of miraculous enlightenment. Right. And I know that's very hard to conceptualize unless you've gone through it. They're both shaking their head here. Kim's shaking her head. Chad knows, that this is part of their agreement with their son, and that's why that they have the ability to use their sense of humor and to speak of it. And I think, their daughter too has some level of understanding at this stage, now that she's a young woman, what it has all meant to her as well, right? So
Jane, thank you very much. And if anybody else wants to call in, dial 602-875-0444. Thank you, Jane. One of the things that I'd like to bring up is for your daughter, and because my oldest brother wasn't suicide, but he was killed in a car accident on my 9th birthday. Mm-hmm. And I did what your daughter did, is I did everything to protect my parents. So I never grieved.
Well, the one thing that was the one thing that my wife and I would argue about at first, because she would she didn't like the way that Kayla was handling it. And I had to tell her, and it kind of hit her. It kind of hit me when I said it out loud too, was that, she's dealing with a different kind of loss. She's dealing with sibling loss. Mm-hmm. She's not dealing with a child loss.
Right.
Which is something that I don't understand.
Right.
So
right,
I don't understand what she's going through, but I understand enough to know that her grieving and her loss is a different loss than what ours is. Mm-hmm. And I think it's taken her a long time because she was still young, but I think she's coming around a little bit more on understanding a little bit more on kind of what her mom and I have gone through.
Mm-hmm. Do you talk to her about her grief and her feelings also? And
no,
I say
because
that because my parents never did, ever.
Well, I talked to there was a friend of mine in Georgia who I worked with. His brother had committed suicide at I don't remember how old he was, but his parents were in that same generation I think your parents are. Mm-hmm. It's not like today. Back then you didn't talk about it. You covered it up, you swept it under the rug, and it was done with. Whereas today it's more, well, no, we need to talk about, Kieran was here. He was a person. He was here. Right. Mm-hmm. He's everywhere. You don't just pack all of his stuff into a suitcase and put it into a closet and call it good. Which, like I said, probably even my parents, your parents came from that generation. Exactly. of you don't talk about something like that. And even
it took us 25 years.
Yeah, and even today, it's still a little taboo because there's no better way to bring a conversation to a screeching halt when you meet somebody new and you're talking and they, how many kids do you have? I have 2. How old are they? I have a 24-year-old daughter and I have a 13-year-old son who passed away. Silence.
People mm-hmm. do not know what to say.
And they don't know what to say. And some advice that I can give to people out there, if you come across somebody who's lost a child, treat them like you would treat anybody else, because that's what they want to be treated like. They want to be treated like people. They don't want to be treated like something that
Well, death is a natural part of life, and so to treat it as if it's something that should be hidden and kept under covers is not good for our psyches to begin with.
You know, I was thinking about it the other day. It kind of hit me because everybody, especially in my field now, you know, everybody says, well, children shouldn't die. Children should, you know, our parents should be burying children, or our children should be burying their parents, and this and this and this. This isn't just part of the plan. And I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, just because as people, because we put this hierarchy on children because we think that children shouldn't die. Well, God allows that. He allows children to die. So that, for a lack of a better word, it has to be part of his plan because he allows that to happen.
It's part of our soul plan.
It's part of us, right?
Again, if the Akashic records we come down and we're going to try to achieve something in order to learn or for other people, it's part of the initial agreements that we meet before we come here.
Right, and if he didn't want that to happen,
right,
then we would all die in order.
That's right. We don't die in order. That's
we'd all hit 80 years old and we'd die, and then our children would come up and hit 80 years.
How about 100?
Or, or whatever.
Chad, what do you want people to say to you when you say, I have 2 children, I have, a 24-year-old daughter, and I have a 13-year-old son that lives on the other side, which, what do you want people to say? Do you want them to just say, I'm sorry, and move on? Do you want them to say, oh, what was he like? I mean, what feels good to you to have somebody acknowledge or validate?
It kind of depends on who I'm talking to. I had one of the assistant chiefs at Chandler. He had lost his daughter in a car accident about 8 years prior to what happened to us, and he actually showed up that night, and I'd forgotten that he had lost his daughter, but I remembered it when he showed up, and I remember asking him that night when we were standing out there, I said, how do you do this? And he goes, it takes years. And about a month later, I had went into his office, and it was just kind of weird. You don't just walk into your assistant chief's office, as just a patrol officer. And I remember I just walked upstairs. I walked into his office and shut the door and sat down in his chair, and he kind of looked at me, and I said, can I talk to you for a minute? He's like, yeah. And I said, I have a question for you. I said, what do you tell people? I said, you have other children, right? And he goes, yeah, I don't remember how many he had, but he goes, I have other children. And I said, how do you address that? And he said, he goes, it depends on the person I'm talking to. If it's somebody I meet, that I know it's just a meeting, a 1 day, a 1 hour thing. I have 2 children. Let's say he had 3 children. He would tell them, I have 2 children, so and so and so and so, and he goes, then I would deal with the guilt later. He said, but if it was somebody that I knew was going to be somebody that was going to be in my life, I would tell them, I have 3 children. I have 2 children here, and I have 1 child that's passed. And for me, it's just if you want to know something, just ask. Don't like I said, don't treat me any different. Don't, well, we have a son that passed. Don't, oh my God, I am so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just, I'm already sorry enough for me. Don't be sorry. Just
do you want them to ask how? Do you want them to ask anything about your son?
To me, that's something that's kind of a personal. And maybe it comes from me working where I work. That's kind of a taboo. You don't ask people how people pass.
Right. It's very personal.
It's a personal thing, and if they want to share that with you, they can share it with you. I mean, yeah, once you get to know somebody who has had that, I guarantee you, it's going to come up. It will come up in a conversation if you know that person for long enough. It'll come up sooner or later. Just let it happen.
If somebody says to you, I'm sorry for your loss, and then moves on,
that's fine.
That's their way of acknowledging
it. It's just their acknowledgement of it.
Even as a medium, and I'm talking to people how many times a week that have had a loss, if they come and say, my father, my wife, I always say, I'm sorry you lost your husband, I'm sorry you lost your son, I'm sorry you lost your daughter, I'm sorry you lost your mother. I always say that first, even before I start talking, because I just want them to feel that have a validation of acknowledging that that is hard.
And we do the same thing in my profession. That's the first thing we'll tell people is, you have my condolences. And,
right.
But we have a difficult time dealing with loss. And loss happens everywhere. There's a Buddhist parable that talks about a mother going to Buddha and saying, Buddha, come, my child has died, come bring him back to life. And he said, go to every place in the village and find out who has not dealt with loss, and then come back. And so what it shows her is that everybody deals with loss. Everybody does.
Yeah. Everybody deals with loss. Well, next week we have another gentleman that's going to join us, and coincidentally, he's a Chandler policeman, and he lost his only child, and I think that's maybe even a little bit of a different loss because it's his only child. There's no other children in the family, so he'll address some of those feelings. And his son passed away when he was texting and driving, and so we're going to continue on this series of understanding men's grief and how men, work through some loss. And I can't even begin to tell you how much Duffy and I, Bill, appreciate that you and Kim, again, you guys, Kim Bilborgi, Chad's wife, is sitting here, and she's been nodding and smiling, and she's got a glass of wine. We gave her a glass of wine so she
we want to make sure she'd feel good.
Because, we always have Pat with us, and he's always sitting here drinking a glass of wine. So we have the kibitzers drinking wine on the side, nodding their heads, and so, I mean, it's not easy for Kim to sit and listen to, that whole story again, either, even though I think that you guys, again, share and talk and so on. So, tell us again where you are working. You're working at a Catholic mortuary.
It's Queen of Heaven Catholic Mortuary in Mesa.
And interesting, were you raised Catholic?
I was not. My wife was raised Catholic. That's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
You bet.
My wife was she was a cradle Catholic. I converted about 4 years ago. And
your conversion to Catholicism, do you believe that it was part of your spiritual journey in reference to what you learned from your son being on the other side?
It was. It had to do with a free trip that we had actually gotten to Italy to go on a pilgrimage with a retired priest, and that kind of started my. That actually probably started my actual physical healing process. I didn't know it at the time, but I think that's where it started. And then,
what religion were you born?
I wasn't. I think that my dad's side of the family was probably all Catholic because they were Italians that came from Italy, and I think it stopped with my grandfather. I don't think my dad carried that on, so I just wasn't raised in anything.
That's an interesting part of your journey, and I've always said to everybody that people who have Catholicism in their background are set up for spirituality because the Catholics believe that there's saints and angels and the Virgin Mother and other things besides just JC to believe in, and, so that kind of lends itself to the opening or the idea that, there's life after life in a different way than some of the major religions do. So it's interesting. So, well, again, I don't even know how to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story with us. We so appreciate it. And
I've had it. It was my pleasure. I like coming here, and every time I get to come here and sit with you, I enjoy it. So.
Thank you, Chad. So Duffy and I are very pleased to have had you join us tonight. And
always.
So we'll see you next week, and look forward to talking to Marcelo Camacho. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.